Agatha Christie's relationship to modern horror is something that I could talk about for hours, and as you nervously check the length of this video, you will see that I have greatly restrained myself. When we think of Agatha Christie, we mostly think of rich people in a big house and a detective with a fun quirk coming along to solve a murder. Now, this is her most popular type of book, as people love to see rich people debase themselves and get their just desserts. However, this isn't the only genre that Agatha Christie explored. She has multiple short stories involving the supernatural, wrote plays in the grand canal style, and has a multitude of thrilling, horrific tales. In this video, I want to explore her best-selling book, And Then There Were None, previously known as 10 Little Indians, and previously before that was known as... you can Google it. This book was written in 1939, turned into a play in 1943 by Christie herself, and had its first film adaptation in 1945. Since then, it has had 18 on-screen adaptations to date, including, I found out recently, a porn parody called 10 Little Maidens, which is...
oh my god, not candy. What a waste.
I don't really know. I just needed to share that information with someone. It also has sold over 100 million copies and has been performed countless times. I believe this wildly popular story has had a clear impact on the horror genre. So let's talk about the aspects of this book, play and film that we can still see in horror movies today.
8 little Indian boys traveling in Devon. One said he'd stay right there, and then there were 7 little Indian boys chopping up some sticks, till one chopped himself in half, and then there were 6 little Indian boys playing with a hive. A bumblebee stung one of them, and then there were 5 little Indian boys going in for law. Now one got enchantery, and then there were 4 little Indian boys going out to sea. A red herring swallowed one, and then there were 3 little Indian boys walking in the zoo. A big bear hugged one, and then there were 2.
The place for nursery rhymes is in the nursery.
Don't worry, Judge. He's down to the last Indian.
2 little Indian boys sitting in the sun. One got all frizzled up, and then there was one little Indian boy left all alone. Какой ужас. So he went and hanged himself, and then there were none.
So let's start with where the title of the book comes from. All the titles. It's all based around a rhyme in which 10 characters meet gruesome ends. This was originally a rhyme performed at minstrel shows, thus the original title, but quickly got changed to the slightly better but not great Indians, and thankfully if you buy a copy of the book today, it will almost definitely say soldiers. In fact, it's a fun game to read the book and know that every time they say soldiers, that's not what they were originally saying. This happens 72 times in the story. I counted. This rhyme is something that the audience would be familiar with.
They're the 10 little soldiers. You know, from the poem.
And this sense of familiarity heightens the fear when it's warped or used for evil.
I won't bring a knife, and I don't have the gun. Even if I did, I wouldn't be killing you all at the same time, would I?
How do we know that?
Because it's one by one and in a particular way. Or have you not been paying attention? And nowhere on that does it say anything about a gun, does it, you idiotic, cretinous bastard?
It also allows our characters and the audience to predict what might come next, and this sense of inevitability adds to the foreboding. Examples of using familiarity in this way could be the stories in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, or the tales that are told in urban legend. A childlike rhyme is popular in horror films such as in Nightmare on Elm Street or Dead Silence because we're reminded of our youth, something innocent, and we see it being tarnished and turned into something grotesque. This is a technique most famously used in paranormal films. And is in fact viewed as an annoying cliche nowadays. But when Agatha Christie was writing this, it wasn't a cliche, it just wasn't a thing yet. The other benefit of this particular rhyme is that it has two endings. So although the book contains the darker, one little soldier boy left all alone, he went and hanged himself and then there were none, when Christie came to adapting it to a play, she could use the more positive rhyme of, he got married and then there were none, to make the play make sense structurally and also end more happily. Many of the subsequent adaptations went from the more positive play's ending, rather than the original depressing one. Speaking of the rhyme, the characters are actually trapped on a place called Soldier Island, previously called Indian Island.
The boatman told me it's because it's shaped like the head of an Indian.
And even more previously... Jesus Christ. This setting is an essential aspect of horror that we still bank on today. By isolating a group of people, we have an opportunity to pick them off one by one. They have no choice but to stay there and fight, as there is nowhere to run. This is perhaps the main thing that I believe Christie provided to the genre, as she was known for her closed circle murders, a small group in an isolated place. So this story, still under the guise of a murder mystery, is a natural progression from this, an inescapable environment where our killer picks off their victims one by one. There are just so many examples of this in horror, too many to talk about, but the first which come to mind are Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Friday the 13th, all of them, I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, Halloween H2O, hell, Ridley Scott has even drawn comparisons between Agatha Christie and Alien. Alongside the dread of not being able to escape, this setting also provides us the opportunity for one of the most classic horror cliches, the power starting to fail so we need to use candlelight. This means that everything is dark and the killer can move around unseen. This is a classic move from Jason, who just loves to take down the power whilst also murdering someone. Once we're in the dark, people can bump into each other, overhear things, and have terrifying moments where they think someone is behind them, but it turns out to be an inanimate object. This happens in the book with Vera brushing against some seaweed and freaking out. Now, we can't have a slasher horror movie without a great killer. In most horror films, the killer themselves, even if they are unknown, are still a big character. I.e., we don't know who Ghostface is, but we do know that it's Ghostface who is killing people. However, here, the killer is entirely unknown. No, but like literally she called the character UN Owen, because unknown. Well, we know what she called the island, so I guess naming things isn't really her strong point. However, our mysterious killer does do some things that provide him with character. The most important being the tape that is played at the beginning of the book, spouting accusations at all the guests.
Thomas and Ethel Rogers, that you brought about the death of your invalid employer, Mrs. Jennifer Brady.
This is very I Know What You Did Last Summer, and even reminiscent of the phone calls from Scream.
Do you want to die, Sydney? Your mother sure didn't.
Fuck you, you creep. It gives the killer some form of presence, and even ties thematically to his personality quirk. If you haven't read the book, please do now. The killer is actually one of the guests, the judge. Therefore, everything he does is kind of linked to judging people and also to this children's nursery rhyme. Most slasher killers have these very clear, defining personality traits, such as Freddy in Dreams, the terror train guy in costumes, and this judge man is making judgments.
The first was a search for perfect human justice. And you've seen the result.
This leads straight into motivation. A slasher killer is typically fueled by two things. Revenge. You burnt me alive, you killed my mum, you bullied me in high school, you didn't let me kill you before, and I think that's kind of not cool, so I'm gonna stalk you and your family for generations, even though we're not even related anymore, so it doesn't really make sense. And the second is a sense of justice. You're having sex, you're doing drugs, you murder someone. You are bringing this on yourself.
Say no to drugs.
Most films involve both. The killer has been harmed in some sort of way and is taking revenge by punishing those who transgress. But some films are only fueled by one. such as Sleepaway Camp just being revenge and Then There Were None purely being justice. Each person here led to a death, and therefore they shall be killed.
They don't transgress, they can't be punished.
Transgressions are a big part of horror movies, which is why the puritanical final girl is able to survive and defeat the evil, because they haven't transgressed. Of course, this is an aspect of a genre that is being turned on its head nowadays, as it's very outdated in the notion that sex equals bad, but you know. And Then There Were None really acted as a precursor to this 70s judgmental view, with our killer literally acting as the judge, jury and executioner, killing people in dramatic ways that link back to his theming device of a nursery rhyme. The way he lays out the bodies and the drama to it is just so reminiscent of slasher films today. I absolutely love it. Including when he fakes his own death and gives himself a little wig and a cape and all that. It's great. I love it. It's good. Oh my god. Although in the book all members of this party are guilty of murder, or allowing someone to die, in the film our final girl and her love interest are shown to be innocent, and so allowed to survive.
You don't belong in this house. You haven't killed your way into it.
Speaking of her, in the 1945 and many subsequent adaptations, Vera is a classic final girl, surviving only with her love interest. She is innocent, doesn't do drugs or have sex, she's brunette, and in the end takes down the killer by outsmarting them in a classic final girl fashion. A quote from the book being, "Well, it was over now. She had conquered, had triumphed over most deadly peril. By her own quick-wittedness she had turned the tables on her would-be destroyer." If that's not the perfect example of what a final girl does, I don't know what is. Her lover in the film also fulfills a classic role. If someone other than the final girl survives, it's typically their romantic interest. Lombard fills this role of a bad boy with a heart of gold, which is so often seen in horror films. In the book, Vera has actually committed the murder and therefore doesn't survive, hanging herself. In adaptations which follow this ending, she is often shown having sex with Lombard and drinking more, an element which makes sense as she is losing the purity of his final girl status. My final point is again something that Christie is known for: twist endings. Christie's endings are one of the reasons her stories stand the test of time, because they're difficult to work out but still make sense when you know the solution. In this vein, she provides us with the classic twist which comes up again and again in horror films from then on: the killer faking their own death in order to commit murder secretly. This is a trope that is used throughout the Scream franchise in particular. Like, every time the main murderer fakes his own death, to the point where if I was Sydney, I feel like I would start double tapping every dead body I found. Like, I don't trust any of you guys. The franchise is in of itself a classic murder mystery, whilst being a slasher, and perhaps shares the most similarities with our original book from 6 decades before. I would even say that the image of a killer being splayed out covered in blood in order to trick the others into thinking they're dead is one that reminds me of the king of twists, the Saw franchise. Now, I am by no means claiming that Christie invented the concept of twist. Hell, I could claim that one of the only better-selling authors, Jesus, has a similar twist with him coming back to life after 3 days. I will not claim that, but I will say that Christie wrote at least 77 books, with most of them having some form of twist in them, and I'm sure that these twists helped inspire many horror movie endings. Now, I may do a video on this in the future, but if you were to ask me whether And Then There Were None was the first slasher film, I would say no. Even though the 1945 film has many tropes that I haven't even spoken on, the underlying comedy to undercut the tension.
Do you take me for a fool, Mr. Lombard?
Don't be silly, Roger.
Don't be silly yourself, sir.
The bumbling policeman.
I get it.
The POV killer shots. It and the book is lacking one thing that I view as essential to a slasher film: youthful characters.
It's different in every culture, and it has changed over the years, but it has always required youth.
Slashers are targeted at a young audience, so in a slasher the characters we follow are typically a group of young people. I'm talking teens up to 25-year-old minors. This is a personal opinion, but I genuinely can't think of a slasher in which so many of the main characters are 50 plus. In fact, I would love to see one, but I don't think that's been a thing yet. If I was talking about the book, I would probably describe it as a horror thriller, and the 1945 film is a bit of a comedic murder mystery. If I described them both as slashers, I would have to then acknowledge that the earlier films, 13 Women in 1932 and The Ninth Guest, 1934.
Tonight you are commanded to play an absorbing game. A game of death.
Would be slashers too. Either way, this film is not the first slasher. However, I hope that I have shown why I am certain that And Then There Were None lit the fuse to what would become the slasher genre years down the line. The story continues to be compelling and taken in many directions. And there's even rumours about another new adaptation coming out, given the popularity of Knives Out and Branagh's Poirot. So let's hope that goes well. If you got to the end of this, thanks so much for listening. This is a topic I've wanted to talk about for so long. I find it really interesting, so I hope you did too. If you have any opinions about it, please do let me know. But overall, thanks so much for listening, and perhaps I will see you soon with another random rant about a topic I find interesting. Goodbye!